staunch fiscal conservative who, like Dr. Ron Paul, walks the walk on behalf of the taxpayer. Tom is here tonight to make an endorsement in the Palmetto State's pivotal First in the South presidential primary. Ladies and gentlemen, a principled leader making a principled choice for taxpayers everywhere, Tom Davis.
The side of a 400 some odd to 1 vote. Many times the other person on the side of the vote with him, Mark Sanford, casting the vote, trying to hold the line for liberty, hold the line on spending. So I got inducted with Dr. Paul very early. I want to call attention to my wife and my daughters that are here this evening. I'm not sure exactly where they are, but if they please stand up.
Right in front of you.
Turn around and wave to these guys, because these are the guys that I'm here to do it. At the end of the day, this is about Tom Davis. It's not even about Ron Paul. It's about the ideas that he stands for. It's about the ideas that our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence stand for. It's about this notion that government stands to secure the blessings of liberty. Government stands for the proposition that we're going to protect freedom, we're going to protect life, liberty, and allow the pursuit of happiness, and we're not going to have government solve all our problems. We're not going to turn over all responsibilities to government. We're not going to turn over our dollar to government. And it's a tragedy that in the year 2012 we have to say something like that as if it were a revelation. As if we don't know in our DNA that that's who we are as Americans. That our country was founded upon these unique principles. Not aristocracies, not divine rule of kings. The power comes from the people, and it gives power to the government, and that's all it has. One of the nice things about being in South Carolina every 4 years is you get to meet candidates firsthand. And I've had that chance. I've had the chance to have dinner with Governor Huntsman. He's a fine man. I've had the chance to introduce Newt Gingrich and Rick Perry, Rick Santorum, Michelle Bachmann, all these individuals, my constituents. And at the end of the day, when I sat down, I realized there are a lot of good people running for this race, but there's only one person speaking to what I believe is the core problem in our country today. You can talk a lot about national defense, you can talk a lot about other problems, but the biggest threat to our liberty comes from debt. James Madison, John Adams, they all recognize that. You can have tyranny either by the sword or through debt. And with $15 trillion of debt, we're having tyranny through bankruptcy in this country. And there is only one candidate that is talking about this problem to the degree, at the scale, and with the scope that it needs to be talked about. You can't nibble around the edges anymore. We can't just go ahead and have good enough. We can't go ahead and have incremental steps. Incremental steps have grown our deficit to now over $2 trillion a year. It's grown our national debt to over $15 trillion a year. We need drastic, radical return to the principles this country was founded upon. And if you look at Dr. Paul, and if you look at the lonely battle that he's fought up there in Washington, D.C., and if you look at the courage that he has shown, and if you looked at the withstanding of the pressure that I know he's under, because I feel it in Columbia. I feel it in Columbia all the time. Corporations are out there with their lobbyists, and they want handouts, they want subsidies, they want loopholes, they want grants, they want special treatment, they want crony capitalism, and it is rotting our republic from the very core. That's what's happening in South Carolina. That's what's happening. in special grants and subsidies to corporations. Last year was over $1 billion we gave away to corporations. And during that time that we have seen state welfare increase to corporations, our per capita income has plummeted. There is a direct correlation to the degree of freedom society has and its degree of prosperity. And we have been on the slide in South Carolina. We have been on the slide in the United States of America. I want to make South Carolina the freest state in the nation, and I want the United States to be the freest country in the world. Through that, when we come to the thing that makes this nation unique. You know about the Freedom Index that's been sliding. We know about the taxes that are rising higher and higher, and the corporate loopholes, the Solyndra scandals. And guess what? It's not just the Democrats, guys. It's the Republicans that have to feed the trough up there, too. Everybody! I love the idea of phasing out this income tax code that is about that tall and is riddled with exceptions and corporate favors. You have to phase it out. Dr. Paul will do that. That's a huge reason why I'm supporting him for President of the United States. Yeah! The growth of spending. We need radical surgery, not an aspirin. We need to go ahead and eliminate energy, HUD, commerce, interior, and education. They are not doing anything in Washington, D.C. that we cannot do. I was talking to Dr. Paul backstage there, and I shared with him that in the past 4 or 5 years, I've developed an obsession with the Austrian School of Economics, with Mises, with Hayek. We need to get back to the free market. We need to get back where the way you get ahead in this country is by having an idea, taking your money, working hard, and then reaping the benefits of your labor. Not by hiring a lobbyist and getting yourself a loophole. That is not America. That's not America. The gentleman right there just wrote up a book called End the Fed. That is something that the country... about the Federal Reserve, and talking about quantitative easing, and talking about monetary policy, and talking about how it devalues our dollar, and talking about how it's canting and pumping into our economy. He has brought to the forefront ideas that 5 or 6 years ago people had no idea what you were talking about. Now everybody in this field talking about it. We have Dr. Ron Paul to thank for that. Yeah! I've only been a senator for 3 years. Before that, I was the chief of staff for a governor. The highest honor I have ever had in public life is this evening. A man that I've looked at and admired for a tremendously long time, whose books I've read, whose video clips I've watched avidly as my daughter watches Glee. A man that I admire, the champion of the Constitution, the defender of free markets, and the next president of the United States.
Standing over here. And I thank you for coming out. It's always encouraging. People sometimes give me credit for encouraging them. I tell you what, when you come out support this cause that we have and support the free market and individual liberty and a sensible foreign policy. Believe me, you give me a lot of encouragement, and thank you very much. I don't know if you've noticed, you probably have, the campaign's been going pretty well. Did well in Iowa, did well in New Hampshire, and we're going to do well next Saturday, right? And when we do well, it will send a powerful message. And the message is the message of liberty, that great substance that made America so great. And they are going to hear that loud and clear. Issues for a long time. When I started out in the 1970s, it was mainly on a lark because I had been introduced to sound economic theories by the Austrian school, and yet I thought we were going in absolutely the wrong direction when we severed the last tie to sound money, realizing that that was the last link of restraint on the monetary authorities to print money at will for the politicians who I knew would spend too much money, and they did. And that is the reason we have to reverse this. We have to have a clear understanding what the role of government ought to be, and we ought to have a clear understanding of economic policy and a clear understanding of why we have to rein in the Federal Reserve System. Would speed up the process to monetary reform and returning to constitutional money, we'd just find out what the Fed's been doing, a full and clear audit of everything the Fed has done. So we have our plate full because what we're trying to do is reverse not this administration. This administration has been pretty bad. But I'll tell you what, the last 30 or 40 or 50 years hasn't been too good either. It's been on a slide away. So we have to put the blame where it is. And really, I truly believe that ideas have consequences. And bad ideas have bad consequences. And we've been dealing with bad ideas for a long time, especially back to at least in the 1930s. And we haven't done well, and it has brought on us this absolute bankruptcy of this country that has engulfed the world, and it's not going to go away. The only question is what are we going to do about it? How are we going to resolve it? And what are we going to replace it with? And we have a pretty good understanding of what we should replace it with because we don't have to invent it. It's not brand new. It's a relatively new idea when it comes to history because freedom is a new idea. Well, throughout the 6,000 years of recorded history, the people in those times rarely had true freedom. And we as a nation had probably one of the best systems, the freest system, and the most prosperous system, and the largest middle class, which is the consequence of having freedom. But that's not the case anymore. Our middle class is shrinking. Our wealth is shrinking. What we have on the surface is debt. Everything we have, if we had to pay all the bills, we'd all be broke. You know, the country's broke. We can't pay off all the debt. So we now have to make a decision on how we're going to do this. So we don't have to invent something new. It seems like it wouldn't be that complicated to sending only people to Washington who know, understand the Constitution, and will obey the Constitution. It sounds like there are not too many undecideds here this evening. meeting, and I would welcome that. But I'll tell you what, it's a little risky because you know what we've been called. You're dangerous, yes. Like the special interests are claiming we're dangerous, and we are dangerous to the special interests. We're dangerous to those who have learned to live off the government and have been doing it. They promote the financial bubbles and they get the contracts, they get all the benefits. And then when the bubble bursts, which we can always predict and know it will happen, what happens? They have so much control of the government that they get the bailouts. They get the bailouts and the bad debt, which should have been wiped off the books, liquidated. What happened? Our government, our Congress, our president, and the Federal Reserve went and bought that debt and dumped it on you. And that is what's wrong with the system. So what generally has happened over these last 70 or 80 years is we've been transformed from a government that was supposed to protect our liberties. The Constitution was written to restrain the government, not to restrain you. Today, the government is secret and our privacy is gone. But the government took over so much in the economic sense, in the social things, everything. Every time we have to use our land or do anything, we have to ask the government for permission. So the government gets all this control. So what happens to the political system? Well, there is an economic benefit to controlling the government. So if the government is nothing more than an auctioneer auctioning off stolen goods, then people who want to have a claim on this have to become as part of the system, and that is why money talks, unfortunately, in this country. Because if indeed our government was there to protect our freedoms, you shouldn't have to bribe our congressmen to defend freedom. But today, it's the lobbyists and all the money in campaigns because there's so much benefits, material benefits that they can get. What we need is to change the nature of this, where our petitioning of the government, which is a much better name than a lobbyist, petitioning our government for our freedom and get these special interests out of the way by reducing the size and scope of government. Free markets can't work. They're too dangerous, But the free market would solve our problems because under the free market, the regulations would have said, nobody gets the bailouts, they go bankrupt. So they claim the free market doesn't regulate well. It's a much tougher regulator than it is when you have the regulators writing rules. The people who are to be regulated write the rules. So this is the reason it doesn't work. But the marketplace is in shambles right now. The debt is the big problem. We're running up a national debt $1.3, $1.4 trillion every year. $16 trillion essentially now. We owe foreigners $3 trillion, and we're not producing. We don't have the productive jobs. We can't tax anymore because there's nothing there left to tax. We can't keep borrowing or interest rates will go up. So there we go. Back to the printing presses. Back to the printing presses of printing money. In recent days, we've had these TV ads and a lot of talk about who are the true capitalists and is so-and-so capitalistic and what he does and no, and they're trying to define capitalism. But I want to talk one area where they really need to try to understand what capitalism is all about, and that has to do with the monetary system. You can't get capital from the Federal Reserve by printing money or running a computer. That is not capital in any way whatsoever. Capital in a free market comes from people who work hard, and that which they don't consume, they either save or reinvest. That is where capital comes from. And today, though, we punish capital. If there's capital overseas, we tax it so they don't want to come home. We have high corporate taxes, high personal taxes. We have over-regulation, which is a tax on capital. And then we have this tax if you happen to own a family business or family farm or something, and then if you pass it on to the next generation, they come in and say, even though you earned it, paid taxes, and bought your business, the government comes in and says, oh, we're partners now, you have to give us our share. This is the reason, if you're a true believer in free markets, you reject the whole notion of both an income tax and an inheritance tax. But today we spend most of our efforts in Washington just trying to promote and deal with the debt. Next week, of course, the President's going to ask for another increase in the national debt by another $1 trillion. There's no serious effort to cut. And all the proposals of Congress and all the proposals of the super committee had nothing to do with cutting anything. All they're talking about is cutting proposed increases 10 years out. And even if that super committee program goes in, it doesn't go into effect until 2013. And then it cuts $1 trillion over 10 years, $100 billion a year. Guess what? Our national debt's going up $100 billion a month. And they think cutting, and that's real increases, but they're talking about proposed cuts in proposed increases. So people are not getting a straight story, and I don't know whether they think they can deceive the people forever, or they're totally ignorant as to economic policy, or they don't have the vaguest idea how serious this worldwide economic crisis is. And I believe it is very serious, and it deserves serious attention. And the most serious thing we could do, if we come to that conclusion, is start off by cutting the budget $1 trillion in 1 year. I think for a beginner, we can cut at least 5 departments and eliminate those and then go from there. But see, my proposal is such where it isn't like we can wave a wand and tomorrow have our way. I do make proposals which actually come across, if anyone would pay attention, probably are more workable and more moderate than some would believe, because I want to cut the unnecessary spending and try to preserve and take care of people whom we thought to be dependent on the government. I mean, the elderly that are trying to get their Social Security money back in should be where we're balancing the budget, not on their shoulders. Same way with the medical care benefits to the elderly and the children. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't work in a direction of cutting back. There is no doubt in my mind that the easiest place to cut should be for all Americans, conservatives, liberals, moderates, independents, anybody. The easiest place to cut should be this wild runaway spending overseas. That's where change the military budget, you don't give up 1 penny of national defense, because you can have more defense with less money if we quit this nation building and the policemen of the world. We don't need that, of course, means we'd be bringing a lot of troops back home. They say, oh no, that's a dangerous idea. I wonder why the military gives me the most amount of money, twice as much as all the other candidates. Maybe they're tired of those wars as well, back and forth, and contributing $4 trillion to our national debt. We don't know when the wars are ending. And Iraq is just a shambles over there right now. There's a civil war going on, and it's not going to end pleasantly in Afghanistan. And we're supposedly over there to defend our Constitution. But how do you go to war that's not declared under the rules of the Constitution? How can these be constitutional wars? Just think how simple this problem could be solved. Don't go to war unless the Congress declares it. Want the war declared and the Congress votes for it, then we should all be behind it. We should fight it, know what the end point is, get it over with, and come on back home. People do have a few questions about the foreign policy of non-intervention, but it just means that we mind our own business, but provide for a strong national defense. Take advice from President Eisenhower and beware of the influence of the military-industrial complex. Look to the Republican traditions in the past that talked about a strong national defense without going to endless war. Another good rule we should have is never go to rule under the authority of an international government like NATO or the United Nations. I was in the service in the 1960s. I was in for 5 years. I was called up during the Cuban crisis. That was a rather dangerous period. There's no doubt about it. There were weapons on our borders, and the Soviets were at their peak, and they had 30,000 nuclear missiles and weapons, and it was a rather dangerous time. But the miraculous thing that happened then was that our president at the time had the good sense to call up Khrushchev. You know, instead of saying, well, I guess what we need to do is destroy the Soviet Union with 30,000 nuclear weapons. No, he calls them up, and they get to talk, and they say, well, you have missiles, Khrushchev says, you have missiles on our borders. Okay. They agree, okay. You take your missiles out of Cuba, I'll take them out of Turkey. And the crisis was solved. What's wrong with talking to people like that? We today now hear the sables rattling about why we need to go into Iran. I'll tell you what, my strong opinion is we don't need to go into Iran at this point. Does this mean I don't care about it? Yeah, I care a whole lot about it. I care if they get a nuclear weapon. I'd like to see a lot less nuclear weapons in the world, not more any place. Secretary Panetta just said this week that they're not on the verge of a nuclear weapon. The Mossad of Israel said that they're not on the verge of having a nuclear weapon. And if they did get a nuclear weapon, it would not be an existential threat to Israel. Now that's coming from Israel. I would think that we should have at least as much debate here as they have in Israel. That's a whole. Is why should we be bombing or sending missiles into a country and destabilizing that country that does not even have a weapon or on the verge of a weapon? If we could withstand and contain the Soviets when they had 30,000, why are we so frightened about containing one country that doesn't even have a weapon yet? Suggestion is that we're paying 12,000 diplomats for work. I'm suggesting that we make use of the diplomats and do a little more talking. Also, that period of time I had in the military in the 1960s was an eye-opener for me because I wasn't really a lot into politics in the early 60s about the pros and cons of the war. Of course, it didn't take me too long to get a pretty good glimpse of what was happening. But it was such a tragedy for me. Although I never went to Vietnam, I did a lot of physicals on pilots who went over there and a lot of physical on inductees that went over there. And I kept thinking, you know, some came home, some didn't come home. And then it kept going on and on. And actually, the Republicans were elected in 1968 as the peace party. We were supposed to end that war. So peace sometimes can be a very popular political issue, if you haven't noticed. Now, what happened was we there wasted 60,000 lives, all that money, and you think of the millions of Vietnamese have died, at the hands of both the Americans and the French. So we leave. And the argument was we had to be there because there was a big domino effect, and communism would spread over that whole land. Well, China, they backed off. They became our banker. They thought that was a better deal than being communist anymore. So, and now Vietnam, they're our friends. We trade with them, we talk with them, we go back and forth. They're far from perfect, but I'm working on making ourselves more perfect than worrying about the Vietnamese. Decided to quit the war in Vietnam and work through peaceful means, then how much more was achieved through peace than with war? And there's reasons for war. War's been around a long time. It's going to be around. That's why we have the military. That's why I was in the service. That's why I want a sensible foreign policy, because I want a stronger national defense, not a weaker national defense. I don't want to waste money, I don't want to waste lives, and I don't want to fight wars that are unnecessary. And there's no reason in the world that you can't stand tall and say that you are cautious about going to war, and you don't need to endorse war to prove that you're an American or you're supporting the troops. That was my philosophy. Another casualty of the wartime atmosphere happens to be personal liberties here at home. Whether it was during World War II, when the Japanese were rounded up and put into concentration camp, it's just that people seem more ready to give up liberties if they're convinced that that we're in this major war. I have a personal belief, though. I don't care what the circumstances are. I don't think you're ever safer by giving up any of your liberty, no matter what the government tells you. Right after 9/11, I supported going after Al-Qaeda. I was very disappointed it took, 10 years. I was also disappointed that they didn't look at one of my suggestions, rather than invading countries and occupying countries, that literally didn't participate in Al-Qaeda and hitting us over here. But what we need to do, what my suggestion back then was, why don't we revive the principles the founders gave us called the letter of marque and reprisal, which means that you keep your eye on the target. If you don't want to declare war against that country, and we didn't have a precise country to declare war against, you declare war against the criminality, the international criminals they used in our early history against the pirates. This would have been a wonderful opportunity to narrow the target and direct the attacks on those individuals instead of going into nation building. So, but the attack on personal liberties has continued. First, after 9/11, it was the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act was not invented. It was not invented because of 9/11. It had been invented several years before. An opportunity arises for those who like to put those kind of laws on us, saw that as an opportunity. So within a week or two, the Patriot Act was passed. And I think the best name for that, and if we could have renamed it, it wouldn't have passed. Because some people voted for it because they thought nobody could vote against the Patriot Act. But if they'd have called that the repeal of the Fourth Amendment Act, maybe nobody would have voted for that. That's essentially what it is. And we have lost our privacy. They can invade our homes without legitimate search warrants. They can come in our houses, look around and search and take things. And then if you know they're in your house and you tell somebody, you become a criminal for just informing your attorney. The government was in your house and searching your papers. So that has gone a long way. But we've done a few things, our government, our country has on top right here in the last few months. And that is the National Defense Authorization Act. Very, very bad piece of legislation, although some voted for it because they figured there were some good things in it. But you don't vote for the bad just to get some good pass. If it's bad, it's bad. You shouldn't vote for it. The president now is allowed to use the military to arrest any American citizen as a probable cause and associated forces associated with a group that might be dangerous, which means maybe visiting a website, attending a meeting, becoming anti-war, who knows what. And you're an associated force that you can be targeted and arrested. Not only can you be arrested by the military, that's only half of it. You can be kept in secret confinement indefinitely and denied an attorney, and that is not part of what America should be. No, bills like that should be, if we're going to restore the Republic, we would be repealing the Patriot Act as well as this authority to arrest American citizens by the U.S. Army. That should not be. We really have enough time to save our republic. Well, I wouldn't be up here if I didn't think we did. I don't place it all on myself because there's something much bigger than me going on in this country. It's been going on for 4, 5, 6 years, and it's growing by leaps and bounds. And that is the freedom movement. People really are understanding. If we do nothing, though, the status quo will drive us down. The bankruptcy of the country will lead to chaos, and then these arrests may be set up for a particular reason, because the riots in the streets will come if we can't take care of people who are expecting a little bit of care. But we can't continue this wild spending overseas and the wild entitlement spending here. It won't work. And at the end point will be a monetary financial event. We cannot bail out Europe, even though Bernanke's over there and promised he will. He's available if there's a financial crisis because our banks have branches over there and those banks over there bought all the, sovereign debt. This debt isn't worth anything. And the banks are in hook with the derivatives. Same old argument they gave us in 08. They're going to do it again. But there's always a limit. You just can't print money forever to the point where finally the people give up confidence. But this time, it's different. It's bigger, more pervasive, more global, and every currency is tied together. Even the Chinese, as independent as they are, as much wealth as they have trillions of our dollars, and they inflated their own currency with the use of the dollar. So we're intertwined. It is unsustainable, so we're going to have to deal with that. So for me, it's not complicated. It's looking to what made America great. That is our individual freedoms and property rights and contract rights and sound money and personal liberty. We have to understand what personal liberty is all about. If you understand liberty, you understand rights. You understand, of course, it's most important that we understand where our life and liberty comes from. And for me, it comes from a creator. It doesn't come from our government. We should have a natural right to the fruits of our labor, which of course that would mean that the tax code wouldn't exist. There would have to be but this is what we have to do. But the big question is, how do you bring enough people together? And a lot of people say, well, Ron, you have good ideas and we sort of like it, but you got to compromise on this in order to get some of the people over here to come over here and join together. I think in many ways, what I've observed in Washington for 30 years has been way too much compromise. They come together. Two sides come together. Those that might want to spend money on domestic welfare get together with those who might want to spend money overseas, and they come together and they keep building, and they don't believe there's a crisis going on. So they have compromised too much. What we need, though, are building coalitions. Everybody has an interest in freedom. And when they understand this should bring people together. The easiest way for people to understand this is we do understand pretty well in this country about religious liberty. We know that you have a right to practice your religion. We know you have a right not to practice religion if you don't want. But if we could translate that into all personal behavior as well as all economic behavior, it's your life, you run your life, don't hurt anybody, don't steal from everybody, you suffer the consequences of the way you run your life, you can practice your religion as you see fit, you can run your intellectual life as you see fit, and you have the right to spend your money as you see fit. All of a sudden, so you come together, but you don't have to be judgmental and say, oh, he's using his freedom the wrong way. I want him to use his freedom the way I use my freedom. No, you can't do that. You have to be tolerant. People say, oh, no, you can't be tolerant. What if they do something that you don't like? Tolerance does not mean endorsement. Because you tolerate freedom of choice in religion and somebody becomes an atheist, that doesn't mean that you endorse atheism. So we need to be more open like this. That is the only way we can bring the people together. It is the way you bring diversity together because it's a common cause, and the common cause is liberty. Liberty is what made this country great. It is the issue that made our country prosperous. It is the issue that gave us the biggest, largest, and richest middle class. And if we don't do it, we're going to lose it. So it's on the line, but I am encouraged. I've spoken out a long time. But there is a difference in the land today. It's growing. I talk a lot about the young people. As far as I'm concerned, everybody in this room is under 30. It is a great cause, and one thing I talk about a whole lot, it's very serious, and we ought to have fun doing it. Because you'll meet allies in this room, and you understand it, and you bring people together. So to me, this is a serious matter. I think it's going to be resolved, maybe not in a week or two, or a month or two, or a year or two, but soon. It's going to be resolved because we do not know at the end point. We do not know that point when the bubbles burst. But it could happen tomorrow, it could happen in a year or two or three. But when it happens, we better be prepared, and that is why I'm delighted to come and visit with like-minded people who are interested and willing to lead the charge for the cause of liberty. Thank you very much.
Libby.